Resuming debate, the Honourable Member for La Salle-et-Mar. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today, Mr. Speaker, to raise my concerns with respect to certain aspects of the budgetary policy brought down on February 11th by the Conservative government. I'd like to join my voice to the voice of my colleagues to show that this budget isn't doing anything to kickstart the Canadian economy and could, in fact, cause problems for credit cooperatives. I'm speaking as the member for La Salle-et-Mar as well as our official opposition critic for cooperatives. First of all, it's important for the government to recognize the important contribution of cooperatives to our communities and to look at the situation from a cooperative perspective, to look at the way they work democratically. They make a significant contribution to our economy and to our society. They are a motor for economic growth, they create jobs, and companies that work in communities and respond to the needs of these communities. Now, this is the case in my riding of La Salle-et-Mar, which is a riding where cooperative groups are well entrenched. They serve La Salle-et-Mar through the Canadian-Italian Credit Union, the one from Saint-Honoré-Villeneuve, and I'm a member of that. They are all members of the Southwest Cooperative Association, and they work to advocate for citizens' rights as regards consumption, to help people make informed choices and to overcome issues with debt. Now, despite the significant growth in the cooperative sector in all provinces of the country and territories, and notwithstanding requests from the main associations making up the cooperatives in Canada, the government brought down once again a budget that does not take into account their realities, nor does it take into account or recognize the positive impact of their activities on our economy and our communities. As the NDP has already stated, the government brought down an insipid budget full of vague statements with no concrete action to help the cooperative sector, and no action to help make the federal government an active partner in their development. However, there are some indications that changes will take place and affect the cooperative system in the midterm. We are going to monitor very closely these measures to ensure that the government will have followed recommendations from this sector. First of all, the government indicated in the budget that it would be simplifying the process for merging cooperatives to create a federal cooperative. This proposal will be complementing measures introduced by the government in 2010. In this regard, Credit Union Central of Canada stated that credit cooperatives have been facing major challenges in the transition to the federal level. We hope that the government will consult with them on the merger process and will take into account their experience and needs. Once again, I'd remind the minister and the government that I hope they're going to put on cooperative glasses, to look at it from a cooperative perspective, to understand the principles which guide these cooperatives, the principles that make these democratic institutions. Now, the second aspect that could have an impact on credit cooperatives is the review and update of the federal system as it applies to credit cooperatives. This decision is accompanied by a situation whereby the Office of the Superintendent of Financial Institutions can no longer continue to participate in a joint oversight of credit centrals. I'd like to, in fact, draw the attention of members to the importance of reviewing the powers of federal entities. But what's more important is that the largest credit corporations are concerned with this measure. The government must take action that is tailored to the nature of this issue, and in fact the changes that will be made to this lender of last resort should not have consequences on an area that is managed provincially. We hope that the government will use an open process in its consultations with groups like Credit Union Central and Mouvement Desjardins. Thirdly, I would like to address the putting in place of a multi-risk demutualization measure. At the start of the month, I met with all of the groups in Canada as part of a day that they had on Parliament Hill for their representative association here in Ottawa. Their message is clear. They need to have a fair and redistribution for the entire sector if changes are made.
Or internal incentives to demutualization. We believe that the upcoming regulation should be strongly oriented towards the elimination of demutualization incentives. We think that any regulation on this matter should be developed considering the history of property and casualty mutuals and the collective nature of the assets. As well as the Canadian Association of Mutual Insurance Companies, we consider that demutualization should not benefit a small group of policyholders, directors, or employees. It must provide a fair and equitable treatment to all of them. All policyholders must have the right to vote and participate in the decision process. We must avoid unfair enrichment as a result of demutualization. It is for this reason that we support the distribution of the proceeds of an eventual demutualization within the cooperative sector. Le quatrième et dernier point de la politique.
The fourth and final aspect of the budget I would like to address deals with statements made regarding measures that the government will introduce to ensure that new participants in the financial market and small banks can be more competitive. We are in favor of increasing competitiveness in the financial sector dominated by 3 or 4 large players. But we also want to remind the government of the need to take into account existing differences between a small bank and a credit cooperative. And once again, I'd like to remind the House that the government and the Minister in Finance need to put on glasses, cooperative glasses, and look at this issue from a cooperative perspective, to understand the structure of these cooperatives and to take that into account in the approach, in the measures it takes. Cooperatives, Caisse Populaire, credit unions are present in communities where banks simply no longer are. They've adopted their services and products to the needs of the people and reinvest in the communities. And the same is true in my riding. However, they have a great deal of trouble dealing with certain aspects of the regulatory framework. In addition, they're a major challenge with respect to human resources and logistics. That's why we need to make sure that new standards do not become another administrative burden. In conclusion, I want to express my concern with the absence of targeted measures in the budget to deal with certain priorities in the cooperative sector, issues that they have called for many years. There are no proposals on fiscal equity for credit cooperatives, nor is there any indication that they will be reviewing the mandate for Financement Agricole Canada.
Development of the cooperative sector. Cooperatives demanded the creation of a cooperative investment fund with joint participation of the cooperative sector and the federal government. Access to capital remains a key challenge for cooperatives. This is why, since 2012, the NDP seeks the support of the federal government to create conditions facilitating access to financing and capitalization. I truly expect that the government will reconsider their approach on this fund, and they will introduce measures on this matter on the budget bill. One can only hope. Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Question et commentaire. The Honourable Member for Churchill.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much to my colleague for her excellent speech. I'm hoping that she could share some of her experience in working alongside the cooperative movement and the kind of rhetoric we've heard from the government side around supporting rural communities and communities that often depend on cooperative banking, cooperative businesses. And while we hear that rhetoric, they turn around and make that very same work very difficult, or more and more difficult, in the very communities they represent. I'd like to hear her experience with this.
The Honourable Member for La Salle-Mont. I'd like to thank my colleague for her questions because, in fact, the current government is turning its back on the regions and on the cooperative movement. The cooperative movement has deep roots in the communities. They offer local jobs. They're beneficial for the local economies. They aren't going to pick up and move when the wind changes. No, they're very deeply rooted in the communities. And they meet very urgent needs in those communities. That's why there are cooperatives that look after health care, in arts, in culture, and in isolated regions. Sometimes they're, be it a cooperative, a hardware store, a grocery store, and a gas station. The only other thing there is a cooperative, and that's what helps to support these communities.
Okay. Question et commentaire. Okay. La deuxième question, l'honorable député.
Second question then, the Honourable Member for Hochelaga.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In another life, when I worked in another field, well, when we talk about the economy, we could talk about a stool with three legs. There was one which was finances, another one which was environment, and the third was people. In the budget that we have before us, this is a budget with just one leg. My colleague was talking about co-ops. When we talk about co-ops, we talk about an economy with three legs, because that includes people. So I'd like to hear my colleague's comments on this philosophy of the economy. The Honourable Member for La Salle-Mont. Thank you very much. I'd like to thank my colleague for her question. That's more than just a philosophy. In the co-op movement, we're talking about an economy that is serving people, that is serving communities, that is serving communities from coast to coast. Cooperatives are born of a need. They're part of the DNA of Canada. They're part of our shared heritage. Co-ops were born in regions like Saskatchewan, for example, because at a certain time, people needed to work together, to come together, to be able to offer services, because union is strength. The Desjardins movement, for example, in Quebec was born of this desire to offer services that banks would not offer to certain people who wanted to get a loan to start a business or to get ahead. Also in Alberta, I met with the association that electrified Alberta, that brought electricity to Alberta, because private companies did not want to bring electricity to rural Alberta. That's in Alberta, a co-op that electrified rural areas in Alberta. And so, Mr. Speaker, cooperatives are part of the DNA and the history of this country. Why is this government turning its back on co-ops?